Well, we're back on, Ms. Turney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you able to hear me clearly? Thank you. So we are going to be examining the witness for 10870 Yonge Street Limited. This is the only witness that we'll be putting forward on behalf of our client. Would the tribunal like to swear Mr. Faletta at this time?
Do you prefer to be sworn or to affirm? Could you take the book of your choice? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole?
Sworn.
Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Faletta.
Good afternoon.
So in accordance with the tribunal's prior direction, I will be very brief in my review of Mr. Falletta's qualifications, unless an objection is raised, at which point I reserve the ability to respond to that objection. So Mr. Faletta, I understand that you are a registered professional planner and a partner with Vouthfield, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And I understand that you have more than 16 years of experience as a planner, and your experience includes the review of secondary plans and special area policy initiatives. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And I understand that you have been qualified in the past to give expert opinion evidence in the area of land use planning before the tribunal. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Falletta's CV is contained at tab A behind his witness statement. Sorry, I should pause at this point because I had handed up copies of Mr. Falletta's witness statement on Friday morning. May I ask if the chair has the witness statement?
No.
Did you say Friday morning, being today, or last Friday?
No, I'm sorry, last Friday. Yes, on the second day of the hearing. And Mr. Chair, if you do not, I have 2 hard copies that I could hand up if that's more convenient. Thank you. So Mr. Falletta's witness statement is not in the document book, so I would ask to have it marked as exhibit. I believe we're on 43. Is that agreeable? Thank you.
Exhibit 43 then. Is there any issue of anybody with the qualifications?
Thank you. Then I would ask that Mr. Faletta be qualified as to give expert opinion evidence in the area of land use planning.
No problem. Yes.
Thank you. So Mr. Faletta, your witness statement, which is now exhibit 43, did you review it in preparation for your examination today?
Yes, I did.
And do you adopt the statements made in your witness statement as your evidence today?
I do.
Thank you. So with that, then I propose not to go through Mr. Falletta's retainer and to go only briefly through some of the overview evidence that he's provided in his witness statement, if that is acceptable to the tribunal. Thank you. So as a final sort of preliminary question, Mr. Faletta, did you hear the evidence provided by Mr. Lowe today?
Yes, I did.
And do you agree with the opinion evidence provided by Mr. Lowe?
I do. I agree with Mr. Lowe's evidence.
Thank you. So then I would ask Mr. Faletta that you briefly describe our client's property.
So to do this, I would refer to tab 8, page 1735 of the joint document book. And if I could share my screen now, I'll put it on. Hoping everyone can see this. The subject site is located here, which is the Longo's the Longo's Plaza, which has been referred to, and it's located at 10870 Yonge Street, and it is located. Sorry, excuse me. It's generally located north of. My apologies. My apologies. The subject site is located on the west side of Yonge Street, generally north of Elgin Mills Road and south of Bernard Avenue or Canyon Hill Avenue. Again, located where the cursor is, right here. It's a developed plaza with a supermarket building located at the rear, an existing pharmacy building located at the northeast corner, and a commercial multi-unit plaza located at the southeast corner of the site.
Thank you. So because we heard today a description of the surrounding lands from Mr. Lowe, I don't propose to describe the surrounding lands again. And as you heard from this witness, he agrees with the opinion evidence provided by Mr. Lowe, so I won't go back over that territory. Mr. Faletta, are you aware of a settlement between 10870 and the city?
I am, yes.
And that settlement, for reference, Mr. Chair, is at Exhibit 9 of the document book. And I had also, you may recall that it had been inadvertently left out of the document book, so I had handed up copies, hard copies of the minutes of settlement. Mr. Faletta, can you please describe the land use planning elements of the settlement? And in doing so, can you take us briefly through the provisions of the secondary plan and bylaw that relate to the settlement?
I guess first I'll stop sharing this screen. So on June 23rd, 2020, the corporation of the city of Richmond Hill entered into minutes of settlement with 10870, the owner of the subject site. The minutes of settlement provide further clarification and interpretation regarding certain specific matters, which include the potential expansion and or redevelopment of the existing buildings on the subject site. As I described, the subject site is currently developed and include 3 commercial existing buildings. There are policies within both the parent Part 1 official plan as well as the modified secondary plan before the tribunal that relate to interim development and or expansion of those existing buildings. More specifically, it's policy 3.4.1 4.1.39 of the Part 1 Richmond Hill Official Plan, and then Section 5.33 of the modified zoning bylaw for the KDA that is currently before the tribunal.
Mr. Faletta, I'll interrupt for just a moment. We're not going to call up the policies or the bylaw provisions on the screen because I think we're all very familiar with them at this time. But if the tribunal prefers that we call up any of the policies that the witness is referring to, I will be happy to do so.
Thank you. So as discussed, in our opinion, those policies, the minutes of settlement provide further clarification and interpretation regarding how those policies and provisions are to be applied. The second area in which the settlement minutes of settlement provide clarification is regarding under what circumstances the land required for the Leyburn Avenue extension is to be transferred to the city as part of a redevelopment. Mr. Lowe, in his evidence earlier today, explained the general alignment of that road extension. And again, the minutes of settlement are intended to clarify when those lands would ultimately be transferred to the city. That collector road is identified on Schedule 4 of the secondary plan. Also, with regards to when policy 12.4.4.2.3, again, that's policy 12.4.4.2.3 of the secondary plan, states that new collector and local streets shall be acquired through the development process to provide for a finer grained street network in accordance with the Part 1 plan. And then policy 12.4.4.2.4 of the secondary plan states that minor adjustments to the location of streets shown on Schedule 4 to the secondary plan shall not require an amendment to the secondary plan, provided that the intent of the secondary plan is maintained. So again, the minutes of settlement provide additional clarification in how those policies and provisions would be interpreted. The third set of considerations in the minutes of settlement relate to the consideration of a reduction in the required width of any future public road or linear park on the subject site, and when such dedication would take place. And in this regard, policy 12.3.2.3, again, 12.3.2.3, Roman numeral 2 of the secondary plan states that in order to provide for appropriate active transportation and recreation opportunities and to support the scale of development permitted, the minimum width of the linear park within the southwest quadrant shall be 15 meters. It also provides that there are provisions within the secondary plan that provide for minor modifications to the park locations and sizes. Based on these agreed matters of clarification and interpretation, no further modifications to the proposed secondary plan and zoning bylaw are required beyond the modifications that were recommended by that are currently before the tribunal. My apologies.
Thank you. During his cross-examination of the city's transportation panel, on behalf of NEC, Mr. Stryfield asked about 10870's position on the alignment of the Leyburn extension. Can you describe 10870's position on the alignment?
Yes, the proposed secondary plan that's before the tribunal identifies a general alignment for a collector road that will connect from Leyburn Avenue to Yonge Street. The width of that collector road is to be in accordance with the official plan, specifically policies 3.5.6.4. Again, that's of the Part 1 official plan, so 3.5.6.4, which states that the width will generally be between 23 and 26 meters. And then policy 3.5.6.4C of the Part 1 official plan, which gives the city discretion on the width of that road. And then the alignment has been generally set by the Dogliola or Doglioli development to the north, which Mr. Lowe has outlined for the tribunal earlier today. And then ultimately the alignment will be determined through a detailed design exercise as part of a comprehensive redevelopment of the 10870 lands, as well as the lands directly to the north of the subject site.
Thank you. Have you formed a land use planning opinion on the secondary plan policies that describe the proposed road network as it affects the 10870 property? And if so, what is that opinion?
Yes, I have. And I've reviewed the policies in section 12.4.4 of the secondary plan. And it is my opinion that from a land use planning perspective, they are appropriate and provide sufficient flexibility to accommodate modifications and implement the desired road pattern.
Thank you. I only have a few questions left. I'm going to ask you first about the position of 10870 and then your opinion as an expert in land use planning. So first, can you tell the tribunal what 10870's position is in this hearing with respect to the secondary plan as endorsed by Richmond Hill Council on May 14th, 2020?
10870 is supportive of the secondary plan that was endorsed by Richmond Hill Council on May 4th, 2020, or 14th, 2020.
And I'll ask the same question with respect to the bylaw.
They are also supportive of the bylaw.
Thank you. And have you formed a land use planning opinion with respect to the secondary plan as endorsed by council on May 14th?
I have. I've read the witness statement of Dana Anderson and agree that the proposed modifications to the secondary plan and zoning bylaw as endorsed by council on May 14th, which are before the tribunal, should be approved as they have due regard to relevant matters of provincial interest in Section 2 of the Planning Act. They are consistent with and implement the 2020 provincial policy statement. They are in conformity with and implement the growth plan, the 2019 growth plan. They are in conformity with the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan. They are in conformity with and implement the regional official plan, and they address the functional policies of the Part 1 official plan, and subject to the proposed modifications of the Part 1 official plan, they duly implement the required secondary plan for the Yonge Bernard secondary plan, KDA secondary plan. They provide for a complete community with a well-planned mix of land uses and densities that are transit supportive while respectful of the surrounding residential areas. They provide for a parks and open space system and a transportation system that supports the proposed redevelopment of the area and improves connectivity and mobility, and then are planned and phased to ensure adequate servicing and infrastructure, and they constitute good planning and are in the broader public interest.
Thank you. I have one further final question. The city and certain landowners, including 10870, are requesting that the secondary plan and zoning bylaw be brought into force in respect of this quadrant following completion of this phase of the hearing. Focusing on the 10870 property, do you have an opinion with respect to whether the secondary plan and zoning bylaws should be brought into force as soon as possible?
Yes, it's my opinion that I agree that both the secondary plan and zoning bylaw should be brought into force as soon as possible.
Thank you. Subject to any re-examination that is necessary. Those are my questions.
Just ask a quick question first. Did you say prior to the end of this phase of the hearing? Is that what you said?
So phase one now, of course, being extended into September. So I would be including the September portion of phase one, but I believe it will be at least our submission, and Mr. Kustner can of course correct me if I'm incorrect, but I believe the city's submission that following the completion of phase 1 of the hearing, that this quadrant should have the secondary plan and zoning bylaw brought into force.
Any questions of like interest?
Mr. Chair, I have no questions on behalf of the city. I just wanted to thank Mr. Faletta for his attendance today.
Mr. Cherniak out there?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Question?
Yes. Subject to anything to the contrary that you've said here or in your witness statement, do you defer to the answers of Ms. Anderson under cross-examination?
Could you clarify what you mean by defer?
Well, I don't want to ask you to adopt her opinions because that's going very far. I'm just asking, are you prepared to tell this tribunal to rely on what she said in the cross-examination?
Yes, I am. She's been very thorough in her evidence and her opinions thus far.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Askander, this is planning again. Are you, any questions?
No questions.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Streisfield?
Just one question, sir. The opinions that you've just proffered to the tribunal, were they restricted to the southwest quadrant only?
In the context of my review, I reviewed the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw in the context of the southwest quadrant only, correct?
Thank you.
That's it? Nothing arising out of that?
Certainly not. Thank you.
Again. We shall pause shortly for a change in.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Foran?
Now I've unmuted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm calling Mr. Ryan Guter, a land use planner, on behalf of my client, Yonge MCD Holdings. You may recall during the opening of this hearing last week, sir, that I had indicated that while we had filed a witness statement on behalf of Mr. Tregabov, our client's architect, upon review of the pre-filed evidence, we don't see the need to call him. So I'm confirming that again today. So I placed up for both members, Mr. Guter, your witness statement, which contains at attachment 1, your curriculum vitae, and then at attachment 2, your acknowledgement of experts duty. And perhaps with those, you could just for a moment turn to your curriculum vitae at tab 1, please. Actually, sir, I guess we should have him sworn first. And we'll mark.
Excuse me, do you prefer to be sworn or to affirm, Mr. Guter?
I will swear, Madam.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
And perhaps, Madam Chair, if we could mark Mr. Guter's witness statement as the next exhibit. Thank you. And then I had also provided you with hard copies of the visual exhibits that we had served on the parties, and perhaps if they could be marked as the next exhibit. Thank you. And just to assist the panel and the other council, I've asked Mr. Guter when he can to share screen so that it's easier for everybody to follow along. So Mr. Guter, if we could just turn up your curriculum vitae for a moment.
I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, that one you didn't have to do. And just by way of overview, I intend to ask that Mr. Guter be qualified to provide opinion evidence in the area of land use planning to this tribunal. Mr. Guter, perhaps you can, with the aid of your CV, first of all, just confirm your position at Weston Consulting.
I am Senior Vice President at Weston Consulting, and I've been with that consulting firm since 2004. And in my capacity there, I've performed services to both public sector and private sector clients since being employed in that position for many years. Variety of types of projects throughout the GTA and beyond in the area of land use planning.
Perhaps you can confirm for the tribunal that you are a registered professional planner, as well as a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners.
I am indeed.
And I know from your CV, sir, that you have been qualified as an expert in land use planning matters before other panels of this tribunal in the past.
That's correct.
As well as the TLAB panels.
That is correct.
And perhaps at this juncture, we could have Mr. Guter qualified unless there are any objections from my friends.
Any issues, questions on the qualifications?
Thank you.
So qualified.
And Mr. Guter, I think you can close out your CV. But just as a general question, before we leave your experience, can you just confirm for the tribunal that you have undertaken as part of your practice as a professional planner work in York Region?
That is correct, I have.
And as well as that, you have also undertaken projects in Richmond Hill previously?
Yes, indeed.
And then I guess, sir, if you could go a little bit further geographically, I assume from your CV that your practice also takes you to other points within what we have referred to as the GTAH area.
That's correct. And just as an overview of actively participated in official plan amendments,
secondary plans, zoning bylaw amendments, and right through to site plan applications, minor variants, and plans of subdivision throughout the GTA, including in York region, but also in Durham region, within Peel region and other locations, as well as in the city of Toronto. And that has certainly provided me with a variety of understanding of different instruments, as well as policies and approaches to land use planning instrumentation, as well as development considerations.
And just before we move off your background, can you just confirm for the tribunal when you were retained with respect to the Yonge MCD lands that part of which are before the tribunal in this hearing?
Yes, with reference to section 1.1, paragraph 3 of my witness statement, I was engaged and retained by Yonge MCD Inc. in May of 2015 in respect of the lands now known as 59 Brookside that have been consolidated with formerly separate parcels. And the nature of my retainer and the outline of such is contained in my witness statement, basically from paragraphs 3 through to 8, in terms of the nature of my retainer and what I've undertaken.
And just to perhaps move along your evidence this afternoon, can I ask you just to confirm that you adopt as your evidence in this phase of the hearing the opinions and the evidence that is contained in Exhibit 44, which is your witness statement?
I do, yes.
So I won't take you through all of those paragraphs then in any great detail. Can you confirm for the tribunal that you testified last August before Vice Chair Conti with respect to what has been referred to as the Phase 1 Yonge MCD parcel?
I can confirm that, yes.
And your opinions were accepted by Mr. Conti?
That's correct.
I'm going to ask you if you would, sir, just to turn up the air photo at tab 3 of Exhibit 44, and perhaps if you can share your screen. When we started this hearing last Thursday, Mr. Guter, I clumsily attempted to orient the tribunal to the location of the Yonge MCD lands and to introduce the Phase 1, Phase 2 delineation. So this is the second attempt, and perhaps the more elegant one, to just refresh the tribunal's memory with respect to these lands.
Yes, and with reference to the image on the screen, I presume all members can, and everyone can see my screen as well as my pointer. The lands known municipally as 59 Brookside are outlined in their entirety with a red line that are essentially comprising a total holding that is basically set out by description on this image as Phase 1 lands, which comprise the lands that were associated with what I also refer to as Phase 1 hearing, which occurred last year. The Phase 1 lands, of course, were the subject of that proceeding, and the Phase 2 lands, as outlined in the sort of light green color, do provide the extent of the Phase 2 portion of lands that are the subject of this proceeding. And by way of some context, this being in the northwest quadrant, I certainly accept the and concur with the description of the context, as well as the general outline of the area by Ms. Anderson, as well as other witnesses. But I think it's important to note that the immediate context provides for a significant amount of frontage along Yonge Street, both with the Phase 2 lands. But I would note that in terms of context, there is a tributary extending through in this location, which ultimately represents an open space area that was part of Phase 1. And as I'll describe further with the proposed development, that's representative of a key sort of natural heritage feature on the Phase 1 lands. And then, of course, the Phase 2 lands having still frontage along Yonge Street, as well as frontage on Naughton at the south end, and then sharing a common lot line. Effectively, it's one parcel today with the phase 1, phase 2 interface here, which is essentially the proposed street that is conceived of, and that's the extent of the boundary of phase 2.
So may I ask you then, just with the assistance of the attachment 7 in your witness statement, if you could just briefly confirm for the tribunal the application history with respect to the Yonge MCD Holdings lands. And with attachment 7 being on a different sort of north-south axis, perhaps you can just reorient all of us.
Indeed, and this orientation, members, provides for essentially north in this direction. The image itself, for ease of reference, is turned on an angle. This was the development plan initially proposed. I would just simply highlight for the benefit of the members that the lands at this time were comprising a development of the entirety of both what is now known as phase 1 and 2 lands. It contemplated 4 towers, and it also conceived of the dedication of open space lands. It provided a park in the central location here. Again, this is within phase 1 lands, and it provided a road network as well. And I would just note that by way of some comparison, the lands that were originally proposed conceived of, again, the density for the portion of lands that would be considered within the key development area, and this is contained also in my witness statement, of a density within the KDA portion of approximately 6.1 FSI by way of comparison. And in addition to that, the 2 towers that you see here, there was an overall density. And again, with reference of ease, there's a description of what was initially proposed in paragraph 8 of my redacted witness statement. And if there's a desire to provide specificity in terms of what was proposed, I'm pleased to do so, other than to point out that at the time, the overall density conceived of was 3.6 FSI, and the balance of the lands were proposed for a combination of multiple attached dwellings interfacing with the lands to the west, being at the bottom end of the image here.
And perhaps you can just confirm for the tribunal that that proposal was the subject of applications for official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and draft plan of subdivision filed with the city of Richmond Hill in 2016.
That is correct, yes.
All right. And subsequently, those applications were appealed to the tribunal?
That's right. And for the benefit of some chronology as well, there's a process that was undertaken, outlined on pages 12 and 13 of my witness statement, that outlines the nature of a process that occurred with the initial applications being filed in 2016, and subsequent to that, the review and processing of the application, but also a critical element being that there was a tertiary plan, which has been noted and referred to again in my witness statement. The tertiary plan itself provided context for the phase 1 development, which was again adjacent to the key development area boundary. That process intermingled with the processing of the site-specific applications, and then also was considered as part of the evolution of the key development area secondary plan process as well. And if it's of assistance, the tertiary plan provided some important contextual elements that this property provides, and I'll just draw the members to an extract. This is in the document book, tab 9, and this represents an expression of that approved tertiary plan. And what you will see on the screen is page 705. This is the tertiary plan expression, and you'll notice that it provides for a street pattern, the open space that's conceived of, as well as the land use framework in terms of potential low density residential, medium density, and a medium density overlay, as well as most notably a linear park that emerged through the process of the tertiary plan. And you'll notice that there is what's referred to in the tertiary plan as Street B. That was also contemplated through the process of the tertiary plan. Tertiary plan not being a statutory document, but informing part of what was considered and dealt with in the phase 1 proceedings for the balance of the lands. That context being important to note as it relates to things like the overall parkland vision, for example, that's been outlined. There's a relationship clearly between what was conceived of in the phase 1 lands through the tertiary plan process and the phase 1 matter as it relates to then the integration with the lands that are within the key development area.
Mr. Gooder, would you turn up tab 4 of your witness statement, please, for a moment, which is the development that ultimately came forward to the tribunal last summer as the phase 1 development?
Yes. So once again, with reference to the image, I would note that north is again at the left of the screen. This is the phase 1 site plan. It references what's referred to as Street A. And at the time, the contemplation was for the establishment of a public road network. That was an aspect of the phase 1 lands. That also conceived of the public road network continuing to Yonge Street in the form that you see represented here. There was a corresponding draft plan of subdivision as well that was considered, and I believe that's actually the next image below. That is attachment 5. But pursuant to the phase 1 disposition, what you'll see reflected here is a combination of semi-detached dwellings that interface to the west, adjacent to what is low-rise residential dwellings, public road extending through, and then stacked townhomes, multiple attached units, and an adult lifestyle building, an apartment form, interfacing with a linear park, extending adjacent to what would be the open space lands to be conveyed to the Conservation Authority and identified as such. There's also contemplation shown schematically of future development lands in this location here. And this was the basis of what was considered in the phase 1 hearing, 2019. And just for context, this is the corresponding draft plan of subdivision that is coincident with and identifies the various blocks that were considered and presented to the tribunal in 2019 for consideration, and ultimately were approved in principle.
Right, and just with the assistance of the draft plan, can you just confirm the intersection with Yonge Street, as we see in the east-west road referred to as Street A on that draft plan? Was that sort of the subject of resolution before the tribunal last year?
Yes, it was. And it was identified in this draft plan configuration in the geometry and location and parts and blocks, as you see represented here. The disposition of the matter by Member Conti considered the evidence presented, and the decision references the public road as well as provides some commentary and acknowledgement of the composition of that road and its relationship to Yonge Street.
Mr. Gooder, could you just scroll up to the previous slide for just one moment, please? There's a notation there with respect to what is referred to as Street A. And can you confirm, sir, whether that is to be built as part of the development of phase 1?
I can confirm that that is the intention and was the intention of the phase 1 approval.
Sir, with respect to the intersection with Yonge Street, what was the resolution that was achieved before the hearing before Mr. Conti last year?
What was considered and put to the tribunal was that the intersection, the provision of the public road be designed and actually restricted to a right in, right out access, but that it be designed not to preclude ultimately a possible signalization. And I, without being too careful with my words, the member Conti's decision references quite specifically the language in and around the public road to the extent that that's known to members. I have the ability to call upon that as well, but that was the consideration related to the public road at that time.
Mr. Guter, if you can mute for a moment, please. Mr. Chair and Ms. Burton, you will find, and you don't need to turn it up, in volume 10 at tab 52, you will find Mr. Conti's decision from last summer. And just by way of just a little bit of background, there were two matters that came before Mr. Conti that were related. One was my client's phase 1 development. The second one was Mr. Flowers' client came forward with respect to what was referred to as the Oakville retirement residence. And that matter was also dealt with in that decision as well. So hopefully I'm not stepping on any toes in terms of giving that little bit of background. Right. So Mr. Guter, can we turn now then to the phase 2 lands and the KDA process? And I don't want to take you through your witness statement in any detail with respect to your involvement, but perhaps you can just in summary terms confirm for the tribunal that on behalf of Yonge MCD, you were involved in the KDA process, not just the interim control bylaw, but then subsequently the official plan amendment, the zoning bylaw amendment, as well as the part 1 plan amendment.
I can confirm, sorry, I was checking my mute. I can confirm that in fact, the secondary plan process that led up to the current proposed official plan and zoning bylaw before you is something that I was involved in throughout, and in fact from the beginning, as outlined in my witness statement. There's an expression of that on page 13 through to about 16 or 17 that outlines the nature of my participation. And I would simply remark by advising members that I was involved in many of the community consultation meetings that took place over the years, in fact, and participated in those proceedings, open houses, and various meetings that took place. There's been several years worth of dialogue, discussion, analysis, and the basis of what's proposed by the two instruments, the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw, as it pertains to my client's lands, the Yonge MCD lands, have been subject to quite a lot of discussion, quite a lot of adjustment, compromise, revision. And I would say that the proposed plans that are intended to ultimately be put forward are implementing the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw. And with reference to what's contained in my witness statement, might just highlight briefly the proposed phase 2 concept plan for the benefit of members to express that vision, if you will, for the phase 2 lands.
Before you do that, Mr. Guter, can I just ask you to confirm that you've had the opportunity to assess not just the proposed secondary plan and the proposed zoning bylaw, but also the amendment to the part 1 plan?
I have indeed, and I've reviewed.
Right. And then
those
when you refer to those three instruments, sir, can you just confirm for the tribunal, have you had the opportunity as well to review those as proposed to be modified by council's resolution of May 14th of this year?
Yes, I have.
And so, sir, when you refer to those instruments, would it be fair then to assume that you're referring to the instruments as proposed to be modified by that resolution?
Yes.
Okay. Just for makes it easier when you're referring to things. Thank you. So if you could then, you had indicated that you have had the opportunity to review those. And sir, can you just indicate whether you're satisfied that the modifications as reflected in those instruments are appropriate from perspective of the Yonge MCD Phase 2 lands?
I am satisfied that they provide the appropriate framework, both in terms of the proposed modifications to the Part 1 plan, the proposed amendment, secondary plan, and zoning bylaw, as providing the suitable and appropriate framework for the eventual development of the Phase 2 Yonge MCD lands.
You've had a series of visuals both attached to your witness statement and then also filed separately today. Is there one that you can draw to the tribunal's attention that would indicate or illustrate how Phase 2 may develop in accordance with the proposed Part 1 plan amendment, the proposed secondary plan, and the proposed zoning bylaw?
Yes, and if I may, I'm going to draw members to my redacted witness statement, and I've shared my screen, which I trust members can see. Attachment 6 of my redacted witness statement expresses the site context composition, if you will. It's a site plan concept at this stage. And what I would note is that you'll see obviously the relationship once again of the open space lands here, what's not shown in detail, but the extension of the linear park that would occur here. But this just shows sort of a two-dimensional drawing expressing proposed built form in the context of the public road being provided to Yonge. And what you see before you is a concept plan that would provide for 2 towers, one in this drawing and indicating 37 stories, the other being 21 stories, on top of a podium. And in addition, I would note that the overall composition of this particular development proposal is that access would be gained from the new public street as well as from Naughton in the form of a right in, right out, or in the form of an access driveway. And you will notice that the podium composition is up to 4 stories. And what's important to note, and I'll refer to some other images to express a better sort of axonometric or perspective view, and those would be, I'll share my screen. They are part of the Yonge MCD visual exhibits. And this visual exhibit, trusting all members can see my screen, provides a view of not only the proposed composition of what would be within Phase 2 lands. This is a view looking from the southwest, looking to the northeast. And you'll see here is Yonge Street. This is Brookside. This is the Phase 1 development, and you'll see the significant open space lands that are proposed, as well as the linear park that skirts through adjacent to the open space. And you'll see this represents the approved Phase 1 development in context with what would be the proposed 2 towers. You can see the gradation of height and the podium composition. I would note by way of a further expression of that, again, from a sort of a bird's eye view, this is the opposite view to express, once again, the built form relationships between Phase 2 lands and the Phase 1 lands, as well as the open space and linear park composition, which is a key community component here that I think is significant in terms of context. And then, of course, the two towers as well. The third image really just ties the two together in a two-dimensional view as an expression. Again, this is the third of the MCD visuals expressing in two-dimensional form both of the context of phase 1 and the phase 2 lands as well. And I would just note that the some of the specifics associated with the phase 2 lands include approximately 532 dwelling units, an FSI of 5.0, and some additional commercial non-residential space integrated with the podium. That's a key element that's proposed with the site plan. And notably, there's an expression that you'll see here in this drawing in particular, and I might just call upon another image for a moment. You'll notice that there are some step backs and terracing of this building in particular. And I can confirm to you that based on the policy framework that's contemplated in the proposed secondary plan and zoning bylaw, these buildings are beneath the angular plane based on the framework established, and provide again that tower and podium composition and adhere to the policy framework and many of the specific elements of that through the instruments, the proposed instruments.
Okay, so Mr. Guter, earlier you had indicated with respect to the original proposal in 2016 that the KDA portion, or what's equivalent to today's KDA, had an FSI of 6.1. And so you had just confirmed again that the proposal now that would be permitted through the city's modifications to the KDA secondary plan and zoning bylaw in particular would be for a maximum FSI of 5.0. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is that reflected in your drawings?
It is, and it's ultimately it's reflected as an expression of the land area associated with phase 1 or phase 2 rather, and the proposed GFA. And as it relates to the phase 1 drawing, it was reflective of a different boundary. So there was a comparison of the density based on the boundary that was conceived of and what I consider to be a sort of a best fit to analyze the density within the KDA that was initially conceived of, together with now the phase 2 boundary and the KDA, because that boundary has been refined, and the proposed instruments would determine that northern boundary of the key development area, and that being different than what was initially proposed with the first applications.
And Mr. Guter, just also to have you confirm that the proposal, you don't need to pull it back up again, would that also conform with the minimum and maximum height that are set out in the secondary plan?
It would.
Right. And do they also address the angular plane requirements, both in the secondary plan and in the proposed zoning bylaw?
Yeah, it would, yes.
All right. And I don't want in any great detail the boundary adjustment, but just if you could, because you made reference to it, would I be correct, sir, that between the time of the 2017 KDA plan and the proposal before the tribunal today, that there has been an adjustment in the KDA boundary in that northwest quadrant?
That is correct, yes.
And just to confirm on the record that your client has accepted that boundary adjustment?
That's correct, yes.
All right, then you don't need to call up a visual, but perhaps I can just obtain from you your opinions with respect to the policy documents. And I don't want to take you through the several paragraphs in your witness statement where you reviewed all of the applicable policy. The tribunal has your detailed opinions in your witness statement, Mr. Guter. Were you able to listen to the examination and examination to this point of Ms. Anderson on behalf of the City of Richmond Hill?
Yes, I have.
And were you able to hear Ms. Anderson take the tribunal through Appendix 3 of her witness statement, where she addressed the Planning Act, the PPS, the Growth Plan, the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, and the Regional Official Plan, as well as the Richmond Hill Official Plan?
Yes.
All right. And do you concur in the opinions that she offered in her testimony to this point?
Yes, I concur.
And are they opinions that are similar to what we would find if we went through your witness statement point by point?
Indeed, they would. I think Ms. Anderson provided a fairly clear and thorough expression of the policy framework. I concur with her evidence as presented. My witness statement contains specific references that constitute my land use planning opinions as well, and specifically having appropriate regard to matters of provincial interest, consistency with the PPS, conformity with the growth plan, Oak Ridges Moraine Plan, Regional Official Plan, and the Part 1 amendments being appropriate and representative of good planning, in my opinion, as well. And that the two instruments before you, being the proposed to be modified secondary plan and zoning bylaw, also being representative of good planning in that context as well.
And Mr. Guter, can I have your opinion on the Part 1 plan amendment as well?
Yes, it's my opinion that the Part 1, well, the secondary plan and zoning bylaw, in my opinion, do conform to the city's official plan. And to the extent that the Part 1 modifications are necessary to implement, I believe them to be appropriate and representative of good planning.
And Mr. Guter, you've had the opportunity to review the modifications that are the subject of the TSMJC and city resolution. I think that's exhibit 34 and 35.
Yes, I have reviewed those. Yes.
All right. And do you have any concerns with respect to those additional modifications?
I do not have any concerns, and I believe them to be acceptable in my opinion.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note on the record, we had filed with you at the start of the hearing Exhibit 10, which was an acknowledgement of an interpretation that was executed on behalf of a number of landowners in the city with respect, in the region, with respect to the transit station policy resolution that had come earlier. And I didn't want to forget that. Mr. Guter, does Yonge MCD as a signatory to that particular document also rely upon it for purposes of the transit station policy resolution?
Yes.
Mr. Guter, in your witness statement, you had addressed a number of issues that had been raised by the Young Bernard Residents Association. I don't intend to take you through them in any detail, as Ms. Anderson had gone through them in her evidence. Is there anything in her answers to both Mr. Kushner as well as Mr. Cherniak that has caused you to revisit or to reconsider any of the opinions that you set out in your witness statement in regards to those issues?
There's nothing that has emerged in listening to the evidence proffered by Ms. Anderson that would place me in a position of altering my statements or opinions that I provided for in my witness statement. So no.
And then, sir, if I may, Mr. Kagan asked Mr. Lowe for examples with respect to, in response to some questions that Mr. Cherniak had posed to Mr. Theodore, had asked for development applications, I think either proposed or built, that constituted at least 40 stories of development. I think it was north or outside of the city of Toronto. Do you recall those series of questions both to Mr. Theodore and then also posed to Mr. Lowe today?
Indeed, yes.
And sir, first of all, are you familiar with any of the examples that were offered by Mr. Lowe?
I am, albeit not as intimately familiar with the ones that he referenced, having processed himself, of course, but certainly the references to Markham Center, generally familiar with, as well as, of course, City of Mississauga and Yonge and Steeles area.
And are there others that are not necessarily north of Steeles in York region, but in fact are still outside of Toronto that you have familiarity with?
Yes, I would, I guess, express that there's, in the city of Pickering, there is a process that I'm actively involved in and has been ongoing for some time, that is known as the Kingston Road Intensification Area. And that is comprising of lands that are adjacent to the downtown center area and sort of have been the subject of an intensification strategy. In addition to that, there are lands south of the highway within the city of Pickering as well that are contemplated for building heights at 40 stories or above. In those two instances specifically, I think are noteworthy.
All right, then. If I may then ask you for your conclusions and recommendations in respect of the modifications proposed to the Part 1 plan, along with the secondary plan is proposed to be modified and the zoning bylaw is proposed to be modified, that you are able to offer to the tribunal today.
It is my opinion that the proposed secondary plan and the proposed zoning bylaw, and I would say also together with the Part 1 plan modifications as further set out through the TMSJC settlement as well, are representative of good planning. They have appropriate regard for matters of provincial interest, in my opinion. They adhere to and implement, and in fact are consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to the growth plan, conform to the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan and the regional official plan. And I do believe they are in the public interest and representative of good planning principles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject to any questions in re-examination, those are my questions of this witness.
Any questions of those in support?
Mr. Chair, yes, I do have about 5 to 10 minutes worth of questions, hopefully just 5. But with your indulgence, and I appreciate we're getting close to the end here, I'm wondering if we could just take a 5-minute comfort break.
Five?
2 minutes.
5, you
30
got.
seconds. Thank you, sir.
Okay, are we ready then, Mr. Fisher? Okay. I think we're on. We are on, Mr. Fisher.
Good afternoon, Mr. Guter.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Guter, in your evidence in chief just a moment ago, I believe you indicated that you have been involved in the Young Bernard KDA secondary plan process from the beginning. Do you recall that?
I believe I said so, yes.
And just to clarify, did you have any previous involvement in matters relating to the Richmond Hill official plan prior to this secondary plan process?
As it pertains to the Young MCD lands specifically, or more broadly?
No, more broadly.
I would say yes.
Okay. So roughly how far back would your involvement in that process have extended?
I would say that I've been aware of and the specific nature of what details. I've been tracking the Richmond Hill official plan process throughout many years, having a number of active applications in process through many years. So I couldn't pinpoint an exact start date or when, but I'm familiar with the Part 1 plan as it's evolved.
So would it be fair to say that you have a high degree of familiarity with the planning process and policy framework as it relates to the city of Richmond Hill generally?
I would say, I would characterize, I might not say high degree, but certainly a very working knowledge degree, and having processed several applications, I'm familiar with the policy document.
And in your evidence in chief, you confirmed that from a land use planning standpoint, you support the secondary plan and implementing zoning bylaw with the proposed modifications that were endorsed by council in May of this year in their entirety.
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that although your primary focus may be on the northwest quadrant of the KDA, your opinion applies to the KDA in its entirety?
I would say that I don't have specific comments as it pertains to other quadrants, if you will, beyond having specifically assessed the appropriateness of those instruments as they pertain to the Young MCD lands. But I would say generally as a development framework that would be able to be achieved through the secondary plan, I think it generally is appropriate to implement development within the KDA. But my focus has been specifically on the Young MCD lands, and there's specificity with regards to certain policies that would apply to it and perhaps not have the same application to others. So
understood. And in terms of the elements of the secondary plan that apply to the KDA as a whole that we've heard about, for example, for shorthand, the ring road network, the public road system, the linear park system, is it fair to say that your opinions apply in relation to the KDA as a whole?
again, without assessing the implications of such on other quadrants, yes. But I don't want to extend my opinions to lands that I haven't been intimately involved in assessing, which I think is appropriate.
Fair enough, and I won't ask you to do that. Now, as it relates specifically to the northwest quadrant, where your client's lands are located, and I wanted to focus in specifically on the FSI issue. You indicated that the original concept plan that your client had proposed for its lands had a proposed FSI of 6.1 FSI in relation to the portion within the KDA. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
And the revised concept plan, which your client is now bringing forward, has a proposed FSI of 5.0. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's your opinion that that FSI, as well as all other aspects of the bill form proposed, is policy compliant with the secondary plan with the city's proposed modifications?
Yes.
So can you confirm your planning opinion specifically as it relates to the appropriateness of the 5.0 FSI for your client's lands?
It's my opinion that the 5.0 FSI is appropriate for the Yonge MCD lands for a few reasons. The first being one of the principles of the secondary plan is to have the greatest heights, and that would correspond to having the greatest density, typically as a relationship one to the next along Yonge Street, and then providing for transition from Yonge Street to the west. And in addition, the Yonge MCD lands are providing for a public road and additional sort of public benefits as well that afford the lands that remain not subject to those conveyances, public road, parkland, being suitable for accommodating a development that provides for 5.0 FSI, at the same time provides transition in scale and building separation, and among other things, appropriate geometry as far as the configuration would lend itself to. So for those reasons, it's appropriate to have that FSI regime apply to the subject lands, in my opinion.
And we heard from Ms. Anderson in her evidence in chief, her opinion as to where an FSI of 5.0 stands in relation to intensification areas more generally in the GTA. Do you have an opinion as to where that 5.0 FSI stands within that broader intensification context? Is it at the higher end of the scale or the lower end of the scale, in your opinion?
I would start off by saying that that each area in, call it the GTA, and in any planning context is going to be unique to its context, but also its process. And FSI by a measure is only one expression, but as far as 5.0 FSI, I think it does fit in appropriately to the range of FSIs that one would expect, particularly with recognition of the fact that the emerging provincial framework is seeking to obviously support the transit investment, and that lends itself to a consideration of an FSI within the range that's proposed. And it's my opinion that it's the use of FSI as a measure of comparison in terms of whether something is appropriate from a planning perspective. I would not place a high degree of value on the idea of comparing different areas, because each area is unique to itself, and it's also important to recognize that the context and the process for each is going to be different. And so I would place that notion of a comparison, as we've heard, not as significant a factor in appropriateness of an FSI value.
That's helpful, thank you. If I could ask you to just call up your on your screen the current concept plan that's being proposed for your client's site.
believe, I assume all can all see the image on the screen. So this is the proposed site plan concept for the phase 2 lands.
And I think there was also another plan as part of this, which also depicted the linear park.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the one I was referring to. So I just wanted to clarify, in your evidence in chief, you referred to both open space lands as well as linear park lands. And I just wanted to clarify, the lands that are shown as open space on this concept plan, are these lands that would be dedicated to the TRCA?
They would be dedicated to a public authority, yes.
Okay. And the lands that are shown as the linear park, would those also be dedicated to a public authority?
Yes.
Okay. And just in terms of order of magnitude, are you able to give us just a rough ballpark estimate of the amount of lands as between the open space and the linear park, the percentage of your clients' lands that are being dedicated to public authorities for those purposes?
With your indulgence, I'm just going to seek out a reference to answer that question. Just bear with me a moment. So I believe that the total amount of parkland, and what's, just to sort of separate out the elements here for a moment, in terms of parkland, which would be comprising of the different blocks here, it's about 0.4 hectares in area. And then in terms of the open space, I'm going to call upon the draft plan, which would assist me in that. So you can see that there's 2 blocks here. It totals an approximate hectarage of about 0.4. And then as far as the open space blocks, it's about 0.93 hectares. So in total, as a representative of 4.6, would just do some simple math if I could, but bear with me a moment. So it's approximately about 28, 29% of the land area.
So in other words, a little over a quarter of your client's site is proposed to be dedicated for public uses, including open space and linear parks.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Not a problem. Mr. Guter, you indicated you've been involved in the process, the secondary plan process from the outset. Do you recall the motion that was adopted by City Council in May of 2019? And just for reference purposes, that's the motion that has been referred to as the one requesting an adjournment of the secondary plan hearing to facilitate the public consultation process that took place? Okay, I'm going to ask you if you could actually turn that up, and if it's easier for you, I can give you my copy of it. The reference is tab 29, page 2380 of the joint document book. Great. Page 2380, yes. That's the one.
Okay, yes,
So you've seen this resolution before, you're familiar with it?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And if you scroll down, you'll see that in the third preamble, it indicates, whereas York Region's MCR to update its 2010 official plan is currently ongoing, and it is anticipated that upcoming changes to the ROP will likely require further amendments to the Young Bernard KDA secondary plan and zoning bylaw. You see that?
Yes,
And you're familiar with the region's MCR process?
yes,
Okay. And in the next preamble, it states, whereas the Richmond Hill 2010 official plan is also due for review in 2020 and will provide an opportunity for council to consider greater heights and densities for development that are more consistent with approved and emerging provincial and regional policy direction on a comprehensive citywide basis. You see that?
yes,
And we've heard that this secondary plan process and appeal and hearing is taking place before those two MCR processes have run their course. You're aware of that?
yes.
And I just wanted to confirm, do you have a planning opinion on the appropriateness of bringing this secondary plan forward for consideration and approval before those two MCRs have run their course?
It is my opinion that it's appropriate to have the proposed secondary plan and implementing zoning bylaw brought forward. I do not see the comprehensive review processes providing any impediment or restriction on the ability for the city to move forward with consideration and for these instruments to be put forward should the tribunal so desire.
Thank you. And if you look down at the next preamble, it states, excuse me, whereas the initiation of the Richmond Hill Center secondary plan, as directed by council in September 2018, will provide an opportunity for greater policy direction for the city's provincially designated urban growth center, and the Richmond Hill Center is mandated to remain at the top of the city's intensification hierarchy and will be an important instrument to support the Yonge subway extension to Richmond Hill. From your involvement in matters in Richmond Hill generally in the secondary plan, do you have any reason to doubt that that is in fact council's intention as stated?
No.
And it goes on to say, whereas council wishes to set a more ambitious version and development aspirations for both of its KDAs, the DLC, and for the city's urban structure overall than what was envisioned by the then council in the 2010 official plan. And again, the same question, do you have any reason to doubt that that is in fact council's intention as stated? Okay.
No.
So on that basis, Mr. Guter, I would ask you, are you as a planner aware of any policies at the provincial, regional, or local level that provide any direction to defer consideration of greater heights and densities within a particular intensification area pending the completion of an MCR process?
I'm not aware.
And similarly, are you aware of any policies at the regional, provincial, or local level that provide any direction that you should start first at the top and work your way down when you're considering intensification within a particular area, rather than starting at a different place in the hierarchy, such as a KDA?
I'm not aware of a specific direction as per your line of questioning that would provide that.
Thank you. Last area I just wanted to explore with you. Sorry. In her evidence in chief, Ms. Foran took you to Exhibit 35.
Who's that again you're talking about?
I'm sorry. In in her exploration of your evidence in chief, Freudian slip. Ms. Foran took you to Exhibit 35, which were the further modifications proposed to the secondary plan arising from the settlement with TSMJC. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated generally that you were in support of these proposed modifications.
That's correct.
I just wanted to hone in specifically on the policies that are highlighted in yellow under section 12.5.4.2, the holding bylaw regime.
Yes.
The first one is in section 12.5.4.2. It's the third paragraph down. And you'll recall the evidence that this policy is proposed to be deferred to phase 2 of this hearing for the entire KDA. You recall that?
Could you reference the policy again?
Sorry.
It's the policy that reads from a mix of use perspective. It's highlighted in this exhibit. And it's in section 12.5.4.2. The third paragraph in, the one that's highlighted, where it says, from a mix of use perspective, the analysis assumes that there is an increase in non-residential GFA, et cetera.
Yes, and if you'd be kind enough to ask the question again.
You're aware that the proposal that's been made as part of this proposed settlement is to defer consideration of this policy to phase 2 of this hearing as it relates to the entire KDA. Okay, and similarly, with respect to the policy that follows the holding bylaw table, several pages on, halfway down the page after the 3 footnotes, you'll see another highlighted policy number 2. And it reads, the lifting of the H will be subject to a requirement that prior to the approval of any proposed new development, the proponent demonstrate to the satisfaction of council that a mix of land uses is provided on the site. And it goes on to say, including plans that will ensure the replacement of any existing non-residential GFA which would be displaced. You see that?
Yes.
And you're aware that as part of the proposed settlement, as part of the proposed settlement, you're aware that the proposal is also to defer consideration of that policy to phase 2 of this hearing as it relates to the entire KDA.
I am aware, yes.
Okay. And can you confirm, is it your opinion as it relates to the, sorry, let me back up. Do you have an opinion as to the appropriateness from a planning standpoint of deferring consideration of these 2 policies to phase 2 of this hearing for the entire KDA?
I would simply remark that I'm not sure that I don't believe there to be a concern about deferral as it pertains to the issue, as I understand it and as I read it, it's relating to non-residential gross floor area. My client doesn't have any existing floor area, so from that perspective, it's not of any consequence, I don't believe, to the implications to the Yonge MCD specifically, and to the extent that it's appropriate to have it deferred to phase 2. That seems appropriate in my mind.
So you just anticipated my next question. Are you aware of any potential implications that this policy, either of these 2 policies, might have as they relate to the Yonge MCD land specifically?
No.
And similarly, are you aware of any existing non-residential GFA on the Doliola lands?
I'm unaware.
Those are all my questions. Thank you very much.
Any other questions of like interest? Mr. Cherniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cherniak, if you could, Mr. Streisfeld was going to go. He only had two very quick questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Guru. First of all, you had indicated that you were involved in the phase 1 LPAT proceeding before Member Conti. And
Yes.
you indicated also that the evidence led and with respect to the Yonge Street access was such that it would be limited to a right in, right out.
Sorry, may I just jump in? Mr. Guter's evidence was that in fact the conditions that were approved were that it's restricted to right in, right out. So Mr. Streisfeld's correct. And the opportunity in future to provide for signalization was not precluded.
And okay, thank you. And is it the case that as part of that proceeding, the Mark Engineering provided an opinion to the tribunal?
That's correct.
That
Okay.
it is my opinion that the intersection of Yonge Street and Street A should not be constructed as a full movement signalized intersection.
Sorry, no one can see your screen, Mr. Streisfeld. And I would say, if you could give the date of the document that you're referring to.
The date of the document is July 26, 2019, and it was filed as part of the proceeding. Paragraph 32.
Right.
So without the benefit of the document in
I
front of me,
can give it to you if you'd like it.
It's my recollection that seems consistent with my memory on it. And,
Thank you.
Well, that was the evidence of
So Mr. Mark provided transportation evidence in support of the phase 1 applications for development of the Yonge MCD lands that Mr.
Okay.
Conti's decision referenced.
Okay.
But I did miss what Mr. Streisfeld said about the intersection should not be constructed as what? Did you say?
It as a full movement signalized intersection. I will provide the document that's referred to. And that's end of the first question. I've got one last question. And it is with respect to Exhibit 35, and which has come to be referred to as the TSMJC proposed modifications, but I just want to deal specifically with the reference in that exhibit to the concept of stratification. Do you have an opinion, sir, as to whether or not stratification, there should be a stratification policy in this secondary plan?
It's my opinion that the policy as proposed in the exhibit is appropriate. I think it is also a desirable policy to have that consideration. Those are my opinions on that.
Why should there be a stratification policy in this secondary plan?
In my experience, having familiarity with stratification in other municipalities, I would suggest it be appropriate to have a policy as it's an emerging mechanism that allows for the achievement of optimized configuration and compact development forms that are not otherwise restricted by public road infrastructure or public parkland. It's what I'd consider to be an emerging development consideration that has merit in many locations where there may be a desire to provide that type of composition, and where there can be appropriate controls to protect and deal with maintenance and access and liability elements. And that's something I understand the city is considering, and the policy that would provide that is appropriate in my opinion.
Thank you.
Mr. Черняк.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just finding my spot. Mr. Guter, I'm going to start with paragraph 50 of your witness statement. Sorry. I thought I had it right there. It looks like, nope. Oh, I see. Okay, this is your redacted witness statement. And it's now paragraph 48, I'm sorry. So this shows your client's proposals back in 2017, right?
Correct.
Okay. And there's nothing over 30 stories in that proposal, correct?
That's correct.
Now, I think to be fair to Yonge MCD, they are the only landowner proposing something that is now proposing less units than they did in 2017. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you mentioned that the FSI of that initial plan was 6.1, right?
Yes.
And did you say that was for the KDA area specifically, or was it for the plan wide?
The KDA portion, again, not the exact same boundary, but essentially an expression of a best fit boundary, given that the boundary was slightly different. But on an overall basis, the density was 3.6 for the entirety of the lands, averaged out.
So I will admit that I was surprised by that. The reason is tab 25 is the staff report from November 2017. It was to the committee of the whole, but it was what attached the proposed 2017 secondary plan. There was a map 1 to that report that I thought was going to be included in the document book, but it seems that it was not. So I'm able to pull it up here, but I do not have printed copies, unfortunately. Mr. Chair, I could provide those to the LPAT office next week, or I could bring them in September, whatever your preference is.
September would be open.
Okay, concepts. Have you seen this before, Mr. Guter?
It doesn't come to my immediate recollection, but that could just be a function of the time that has passed.
And that's perfectly fair. And I'll show you the part that led me to believe something other than what you've told us. And that is the staff here have said that at your client's property, Yonge MCD, the density proposed for the KDA lands was 4.5 FSI. Do you know why it would say that?
I can't verify what the source of their calculations would be, other than reading what's on the document.
Okay. So we seem to have two things that don't fit together, and it might be difficult to sort that out at this stage. But I wonder, I'm going back to your witness statement. When you refer to the KDA portion here, are you referring to the KDA portion in 2017 or the proposal in 2020? Or is there even a change?
This may be of assistance to try to reconcile the difference. At the time, the KDA boundary with the original applications was interpreted to be different through the official plan amendment application and zoning amendment that were the site-specific applications.
Sort
that,
of
of
pick
course-
that up, Rich. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, was that? I didn't.
That's when
apologies. So the reference to the 6.1 measure is actually not a reflection of the 2017 nor the 2020 boundary of the KDA. It was a boundary that was proffered in conjunction with the original applications, and ultimately the expression here of the comparison was an interpretation, sort of a best fit, because we, in the original application, sought to interpret the boundary for the KDA.
So if I understood you right, then 6.1 FSI was based on your client's proposal of where the KDA boundary should be. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the staff report presumably is based on where they thought the KDA boundary should be and what was ultimately adopted by council, right?
I can't verify what their basis was.
Well, it was the staff report that led to the OPA being adopted, right?
Yeah, presumably if the red boundary was utilized, they would have computed their estimation of that FSI. What I would note is that the building composition may well have traversed the line of that red boundary, which means that they may have had some interpretation, because the configuration of the buildings with the original scheme may not have matched the extent of that. So.
Okay, I'm going to turn now to your the draft plan that you brought up. And I'm looking at this area here. Can you see my hand on, or my PDF hand on the screen there?
Yes.
This area is for future development.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, this is not your draft plan. This is the phase 1 plan, right? So this area here is actually not being developed in phase 2 either, is it?
That's correct.
So this, at some point in the future, presumably your client is going to put forward an application to add something else there.
It would be developed for a suitable project of some kind.
So we're not seeing the full build out on the Yonge MCD lands with these 2 phases.
Correct.
Okay. Now, I've heard you say that this phase 2 concept plan that we are looking at would be appropriate based on the secondary plan proposed policies in 2020, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't see it, but I could be wrong. Is there an urban plaza on this plan?
The current site plan concept is very high level and schematic. So the details of any other functional elements, including any open space amenities, shared areas, or otherwise, is simply not depicted on this. I think as an expression of a design that would evolve, there would be consideration for amenities and access to other shared spaces. But you can see the configuration of this portion of land is somewhat constrained by the geometry of the street and the position of the towers. So there may be limited opportunity for that, but that'd be explored as part of a site plan application.
And just to be sure, I don't know if it's helpful at all to go to the draft plan. I don't think it is, because it doesn't show those buildings. Okay. I'm going to go back to the phase 1 plan for a moment. Mr. Kussner brought you through this park here. This is directly beside the tributary that you mentioned, right?
Yes.
Is that park going to be treed? Is that the plan?
The details of that would come through discussions and as part of a site plan application, which would apply principles of the design together with Parks staff. So at the moment, we've developed a concept for that as part of a site plan. I don't have the benefit of that in front of me at the moment, but it would be programmed together with input from city Parks and Recreation staff.
So I don't think we need too much detail. I just want to understand, is this based on the concept that's been done so far? Is it intended for people to use it and walk through it as opposed to being protected land?
It's intended to be a functional linear park with access. Presumably that would include some programming elements. The intention, as I understood from a variety of discussions and meetings and through the Brookside tertiary plan process, was that it would be a combination of features put in place based on recreational staff and perhaps assessment of community needs as well through their process.
And in Yonge MCD's initial proposal, there was a larger park area right here, wasn't there?
I highlighted that in my evidence in chief.
Okay. I'm gonna go back now to your phase 2 proposal. We have a 37-story tower. And sorry, 37 stories includes the 4-story podium, right?
That's right.
Okay. So we have 37 stories and 21 stories, and then a lower 4-story podium. So no tower would fit on there, I gather.
The two towers as proposed are based on adherence to the policy framework set out in the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw.
And if we go to the city's demonstration plan, the angles are different, but the 37-story tower becomes a 30-story tower, right?
I wouldn't use the word becomes, but the demonstration plan is an expression. The proposed site plan is a proposed site plan.
Okay, so the demonstration plan though shows a similar location to the 37-story tower as a 30-story tower.
Got that.
Okay, and then the other tower is 15 stories instead of 21 stories, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So again, we have an example of a concept plan that shows a development with greater heights than those estimated in the city's demonstration plan.
That's apparent.
Yes. Okay. So you mentioned in your evidence Pickering again. You were talking about taller buildings, so around 40 stories. Pickering's along the Lakeshore GO Transit line or GO train line, right?
Yes.
And that's an all-day GO train that's going to be electrified in the next 5 or 6 years, right?
The details of electrification, I'm not intimately familiar with, but it's on a GO line. Portions of it, yes.
You agree it's an all-day GO? It has all-day service?
I believe so, yes.
And that is, there's nothing similar in Richmond Hill, right?
I'm not aware specifically of the frequency of service.
When I look at your phase 2 plan here, I look at the heights, I wonder if there were a limit imposed of 30 stories, could you accommodate the same density?
I would remark that the ability to accommodate an FSI value can be done in a variety of forms. However, in doing so, there's other factors that would influence the appropriateness of, again, a suitable building height, tower separation, composition of a floor plan, for example, and other factors that would be of influence. So from a theoretical standpoint, yes, one could adjust heights of towers, but you would have different results in terms of a built form expression and context and other factors which may or may not be desirable.
Right, and both of these proposed towers are in the Yonge, they're in the corridor character, so they would have the highest heights, right?
That's right.
And although I'm not asking you for your opinion on whether it's a good idea, it seems obvious to me you could take 7 stories off this tower and then they're both at or under 30, right?
On a theoretical basis, I think that would actually run counter to the policy principle that's been set out in the plan, which is highest buildings along the Yonge Street corridor transitioning. So I don't know that that would actually implement what's proposed.
It's an interesting answer and it's a fair answer, but it doesn't answer the question I asked, which is you could still accommodate this by moving 7 stories from one tower to the other.
Not without impinging into the angular plane for the other building. The 21-story building adheres to the angular plane. If you were to add story height to it, it would pierce the angular plane.
Could you put a tower on top of your podium here?
I can tell you that this concept was developed by a well-known architect that understood and shaped the design based on the policy framework as proposed, the zoning framework as proposed. And the answer is that not without other non-compliance with certain regulations in the proposed zoning. This concept adheres to and implements the policy framework that's proposed and the regulatory framework that's set out in the bylaw. So the answer is another tower would not be accommodated with those provisions unless they were different regulations, and that's not what's before the tribunal, not what's enunciated through the documents.
Right, and you understand that my client is proposing a different regime for height. So I'm trying to get a sense of whether Yonge MCD would be able to accommodate that.
I don't believe so. And I would add that it's my opinion that there's been a significant compromise by Yonge MCD through this process over 4 years that has resulted in a suitable, appropriate, compatible development proposition, along with the delivery of public benefits through parkland, open space, public roads, which is entirely suitable in my opinion.
I'm glad you mentioned compromise because I forgot to have you confirm that the phase 1 decision and that plan was approved with the support of my client, right?
That's correct.
So they don't always oppose development then. Last point, Mr. Kussner brought you to the policies for the holding, or policies that are proposed to be deferred to phase 2. You'd agree with me that those policies are related to holding provisions, right?
Yes.
Okay, and your evidence was that you would have no objection to deferring them to phase 2. They'd have no effect on your client, right?
That's correct.
Would there be any prejudice to your client if they were decided in phase 1?
I don't believe, again, I believe my remarks to Mr. Kussner was that in the absence of having existing non-residential floor area, the implications of those policies are effectively of no consequence to the MCD lands.
Great. Okay. Those are my, and I've asked everyone else this, other than evidence you've given today that might contradict it, will you defer to the opinions given under cross-examination by Ms. Anderson?
I wouldn't use the word defer. I've heard and listened to the responses by Ms. Anderson. I think she's answered them well, and I agree with her answers and her responses.
Okay.
And I concur with them.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Eskander, do you have any planning questions of this witness?
No, sir. No. Thank you.
examine
Just one or two, sir, if I may. Mr. Guter, you were taken to the small piece of land that is in between Street A, or the road, the east-west road, and the 6-story adult lifestyle building by Mr. Cherniak. Can you advise the tribunal whether that parcel was part of the original KDA boundary?
It was not.
Okay.
Excuse me, before, I'm really sorry, but I didn't hear your original question.
Yes, the Mr. Cherniak had taken Mr. Guter to the small piece that is in the phase 1 lands just north of the east-west road. And Mr. Guter confirmed that it is not part of the KDA or the original KDA boundary. And sir, just to confirm, in terms of the policy regime that would apply to any development on that piece, would it be pursuant to the secondary plan before this tribunal, or is it something else?
Just to be clear, the disposition of the phase 1 hearing identified the boundary of the KDA to be determined through the phase 2 proceedings, which we're in. That also not precluding a reasonable and appropriate development of those residual lands, which have been contemplated but not yet fully developed. So there would be an expectation that in the fullness of time, those lands would develop for something suitable and appropriate, and that they would align with the context of not only the phase 1 lands, but the KDA lands to the extent the phase 2 instruments were in place.
I think Mr. Cherniak was trying to get at whether there was an expectation that those lands could develop, for example, for a tower similar to the 2 towers that are now proposed on the KDA parcel. Can you respond as to whether, in your opinion, that is likely or something that you would expect?
I do believe that there would be a suitable built form that, again, has yet to be determined. At the phase 1 hearing, conceived of lands north of that area for multiple attached, it's apartment form at 6 stories. The lands within the KDA being contemplated for 37 and 21 stories, one could expect that there might be somewhere in between for those lands, or something similar to what might exist north of them. But that has yet to be determined or set out.
Right. And then, sir, you were taken to the demonstration block plan. I don't need you to turn it up. When you put forward your evidence that has the phase 2 concept plan, did you assess the current policies that are before the tribunal for consideration in this hearing?
Yes.
And does that phase 2 plan conform with the policies on density?
Yes.
Does it conform with the policies with respect to the angular plane measurements as you had referred to?
Yes, it does.
Right. And does it also conform to the minimum and maximum heights that are identified in the proposed modifications to the secondary plan?
It meets the height policies, yes.
All right. And in contrast to the demonstration plan, have there been any differences or changes in the policies since the time that demonstration plan was prepared by staff?
I think there has been, and in fact, I guess most notably, the westerly extent of the demonstration plan does not correlate to the proposed westerly extent that is now the proposed western boundary. And if it's of assistance with, I'm not sure which tab reference it is, but with some assistance, I would just call it up for emphasis here to
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Cherniak. We are in re-examination.
Correct. Yep.
So I don't know that this is appropriate.
I'm not sure why, Mr. Chairman. My witness was taken there. It was suggested to him that in fact it was on all fours or apples to apples with his concept plan. And I think in fairness, this witness should be entitled to respond.
Go ahead.
I'll just, if I could just.
I'm trying to locate the document in the tab references here. Forgive me for doing so. I don't know if there's.
Should be tab 81.
Okay, thank you. The important note which I conveyed is the expression of the boundary, and again, the boundary in this case, for purposes of the zoning bylaw, is not this red line here. The zoning bylaw boundary is in fact further west, and it's articulated to be the west edge of Abitibi, that being a significant difference, and that of course would change the baseline of where one might consider, again, the angular plane measurement that would express the built form height as a function of the policy regime. So that is a notable difference with the demonstration plan that simply, I guess, wasn't updated to reflect that difference.
Now, Mr. Thank you. We've done pretty well this afternoon. If I can just turn back to some questions that were put to you by Mr. Kusner for a moment. He had you review the land area that constitutes the 28 to 29% estimate that you have given of the land that is to be dedicated either to the city or to other agencies. Do you recall that line of questions?
Yes.
All right. And can you just confirm for the tribunal, are all of those dedications, whether they're park, whether they're road, conservation authority lands, are those all now secured through the approved draft plan that was before Mr. Conti last summer?
They're all reflected in the draft plan, yes, and there's an advancement of that and draft plan conditions that would ultimately be implementing of those, securing of those conveyances.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Good. I believe we still have the region, Ms. Ogunmefen.
Mr. Chair, I'm in your hands as to how we proceed, but it would be my preference not to split the region's case. And so I have two witnesses. One of them is here. I don't believe that we'll be completing his evidence in chief today. So it would start and potentially he might be under cross. So I'm in the board's hands as to how we move forward today.
Is there any
Is it
issue?
essential?
No issue, Mr. Chair. I had discussed this with Ms. Ogunmefen, and I agree it would not be desirable to start one of the region's witnesses without the certainty that would be able to finish cross.
I agree with that.
And have them carried over under cross for 2 months. So I have no issue with deferring all of the region's case to the September dates.
So that wraps it.
That completes the evidentiary portion. There were some housekeeping items that we wanted to discuss with the panel, and I think Mr. Streisfield also had something he wanted to say.
We've got some nice housekeeping things to do too, and we prefer to get on with those. However, what's up?
Can I have, my mic's on now? Thank you. Just wanted to say to the tribunal that my son is a first-year law student, bear with me, who is in the dual Canadian and American JD program at Windsor and Mercy Law School. He was supposed to be interning in Detroit in a court in the summer, but because of COVID, the border was shut, and of course he was sent home. And as a consequence of that, he needed a summer job, and he asked his father if he could work for him. So I gave him a number of assignments, and one of them was to come up with the appropriate words to express my apologies to this tribunal. And I thought that I would just read exactly what he wrote, if I may be permitted, sir. To the tribunal. I just wanted to quickly take the opportunity to apologize if my content or tone were perceived as aggressive. Ultimately, I am here to represent the best interests of my clients and to promote the interests of all concerned in order to get the best possible outcome. Another aspect is, I believe, this type of opposition and questioning best achieves the search for truth and uncovers the facts so everyone can see them clearly and have confidence in the outcome given the high stakes for all parties involved. To be clear, I am looking forward to working with the parties to achieve the most desirable outcome for all involved. Thank you very much. And I would ask the tribunal to accept my apology.
Except that
I have one more housekeeping matter.
I can acknowledge that the tone sometimes interferes with the other good intent.
I have one more quick housekeeping note, sir. This, to my knowledge, is the first hybrid hearing being conducted by this tribunal.
I can agree with that.
In the most extreme circumstances that this province has ever seen. It could not be made possible without thanking Mr. Andrew Crawford of the City of Richmond Hill. I would like to make a donation to the I have made a donation to the Amarok Society on behalf of myself, all parties, all council, LPAT members, and everyone participating in the Bernard KDA LPAT proceeding in appreciation of Andrew Crawford, who has been instrumental in allowing the hearing to proceed via video conference. Thank you very much, sir.
We can all agree to that one for sure. It wouldn't have happened without him in this new venture. And yes, correct, it is the first. And generally speaking, it's worked pretty well. And Ms. Foran has certainly learned how to share. Well as everybody else. So that's a wrap. Is there any other housekeeping issues, Mr. Kusner?
I think Mr. Kagan had some items he wanted, or one item he wanted to discuss as well.
Just one item. Can everybody hear me? Yes, I'm getting, yes, okay, everyone can hear me. Sir, the only thing I'm concerned with is that we ensure that we have enough time scheduled in September to complete phase one, either by putting time limits on everything that has to happen from here on in to make sure that we finish phase one, including, if necessary, brief closing submissions, or alternatively, and I'm loath to suggest this, that we find more than 5 days in September to complete phase one. Because the worst thing that would happen in terms of my client's perspective is that the interim control bylaw remains on the lands for perhaps many months more while we try to find dates that not only accommodate the tribunal, but witnesses and counsel. So that is my request, sir.
Of course, the concern from our side too is to have it complete in the appropriate time without continuing to drag it out over any further period of time. We've sort of thought about that ourselves, about the time. And now is the time to change anything if we have to change it, because if you know, this has been successful in a sense that it's going to start to be used and things will get busy again. So how do we do this one? Do we give you an opportunity to have some time to discuss it further, or has anybody got a good suggestion now?
I haven't had a chance to canvass my colleagues on this, but my own suggestion would be that the most logical starting point would be to consider whether we might be able to take advantage of the additional days in the second week and proceed consecutively. That would be the cleanest way of doing it. Speaking for myself, and I think Mr. Kahar, we are both available for the balance of that second week. So I might suggest that we all start out by looking to everyone's availability for the rest of those, the Tuesday through Friday of the second week, if it works for all council and the tribunal.
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Cherniak. One of the reasons why we picked the week that we did, ending on the 14th, is that I am not available on the 15th, 16th, or 17th. And that potentially is when I would be leading my case.
Didn't we already, were we already canvassing dates that would have followed everybody's availability? I think it went to November. We should at least grab those. I think that's, I'll leave that to you.
Wow. I got to say, from this side, I don't want my tone to change any further about the continuation.
Mr. Chair, on behalf of my client, I certainly would make myself available to suit the tribunal's availability to have this matter completed. So I echo Mr. Kagan's objective, but I also will say if the tribunal can find time right after that period in September, and I recognize Mr. Cherniak's constraints, so I'm not suggesting those days, I certainly would make myself available and our witnesses to attend.
What about the week of September 21st?
Yeah, the last 2 weeks.
Oh, I
Last 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, we got to get dates.
Yeah.
I was thinking of keeping the 5 days that everybody has in their calendar already, then giving Mr. Cherniak an opportunity to do what he has to do 15, 16, 17. Obviously, the 18th of Friday doesn't seem much sense to come back for 1 day. And maybe Mr. Cherniak needs a break. And then the week of the 21st is what I was suggesting.
So was I.
So I'm sorry. I have to advise that my witness says he is in another hearing that is starting that week. He thinks he will not have to testify that week. So it should be okay. There's just that risk. And maybe it means I have to go before Mr. Streisfield to avoid it.
Sure.
Those are the kind of things that we generally work out. So
Yeah, on our part, we'll have to make sure.
Well, we don't have anything else on, do we?
Well, currently, we understand we don't have anything else on. I just want to confirm that.
It's coming here. It's not a, excuse me. It's coming here. It's not a question of hearing rooms in the tribunal offices.
We'll run without thought of any complication on our part. And the week of the 21st then? The whole week of the 21st?
Sure.
Sir, it's
Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Mr. Annabelle. I have the Portland's hearing in Toronto starting on September 21st, sir.
I was going to have this.
Thought we did. We don't.
And then we're running to Barney. While the Jewish holidays were going through, right? We went through the calendar.
Oh yes, one of the holidays.
Oh, well, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair, then Madam Member, the other option that I suggested was we just have to find a way to get it done in 5 days. So we have to agree before we leave today.
It's impossible.
How much time each person's going to get.
It's impossible.
If you can work that out, we would agree with you on that one. Could we suggest that further discussion take place between 4:15 and 5 o'clock today with council to see if they couldn't come up with something?
Sure.
And then you can advise us, and if we necessary, we could have a telephone conference call to set the dates that you people arrive at. And we could do that next week, as a matter of fact, anytime you want on a TCC.
Perfect.
hitting you a little bit about 4:15 but whatever you can do.
We're all here.
Maybe the
We're all
5 o'clock
here.
pressure is good.
I think
Okay.
it's actually not a bad thing.
Okay. Well, maybe the lawyers can come into the committee room then, so
Mhm,
the members don't have to hear our discussion.
mhm.
There may be too many of us there. Or maybe not.
There are also some of us now only on the Zoom hearing. So we're on the Zoom link. So we'll need to keep the Zoom link open.
Correct.
Maybe if I just suggest we keep the Zoom link open and terminate the live stream. That way we can converse amongst ourselves on scheduling matters.
We did thank Andrew, and
Mhm.
certainly, I'm not sure we want to invite you back again unless we have to. Not sure what the circumstances are going to be, but I hope we're working out something. But anyway, Andrew, thank you very much. And
Yes.
look forward to you again if we have to.
Likewise.
Big donation in hand.
As far as the panel is concerned, we're completed as far as the panel goes then.
Thank
And
you.
Mr. Kahar and the panel are going to try to work out boxes of exhibits.
Great.
You all.
Thank you.
YouTube could stop it.